A 23-year-old with 200,000 YouTube subscribers walked into Sam Ash Music on 48th Street, saw a 71-year-old man in a dark jacket and reading glasses quietly testing an acoustic guitar, and said, "No offense, but that's a player's guitar. We've got some nicer beginner stuff at the back." His phone was recording. What he did not know was that the acoustic guitar was the kind of instrument Keith Richards had written Wild Horses on in 1969, sitting on the floor of a rented house in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, at 2 in the morning when the song arrived all at once and Keith Richards recorded it on a cassette before it could leave. What he did not know was that the store assistant watching from behind the counter had worked on this street for 30 years and recognized the man at the guitar stand the moment the man walked through the door. What he did not know was that the old man was Keith Richards. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and subscribe if you haven't already. Keith Richards placed the guitar back on the stand. Keith Richards stepped aside. Keith Richards said nothing. West 48th Street in Midtown Manhattan had been called Music Row since the 1930s, when the concentration of instrument shops, music publishers, and rehearsal studios that had accumulated in the block between 6th and 7th Avenues gave the street a density of musical purpose that no other block in the city matched. By 2015, the street had changed. Some of the old shops were gone. The industry had reorganized itself in ways the 1930s could not have predicted. But Sam Ash Music had been at 163 West 48th Street since 1966 and had remained through all the changes the kind of shop that serious musicians came to, where the inventory was deep and the staff knew what they were selling. The woman behind the counter in July 2015 was named Linda, and Linda was 57 years old, and Linda had been working at Sam Ash on 48th Street for 30 of those years, which meant that Linda had been selling instruments on this specific block since 1985 and had in that time sold to and spoken with and occasionally watched in the store a range of musicians whose combined output could fill a very large archive. Linda recognized Keith Richards when Keith Richards walked through the door. Linda recognized him the way she always recognized him when he came in, quietly, without changing her expression, without saying anything, because saying something would change the quality of what was about to happen, and the quality of what was about to happen, Linda understood, was better left undisturbed. Keith Richards was 71 years old in July 2015 and was in New York because the recordings for what would become his first solo album in 23 years were being completed at a studio in the city, and the completion was going in the specific way that completions go when a project has been building for 2 years and has finally arrived at the point where what remains is the work of refinement rather than the work of creation. Keith Richards had the Tuesday afternoon free. Keith Richards walked to 48th Street because 48th Street was where Keith Richards walked when he was in New York and had an afternoon, the way he went to Denmark Street when he was in London and had an afternoon, and to certain streets in Chicago and Memphis and New Orleans when he was in those cities, because the streets that had been built around music were the streets that made sense to Keith Richards in a way that other streets did not. Keith Richards walked into Sam Ash, went to the acoustic section, and took down a Dreadnought acoustic from the wall. The guitar was nothing special by the standards of what Keith Richards owned and played, a good mid-range instrument, properly set up, the kind of guitar that rewarded honest playing. Keith Richards sat on the testing stool and began to play chord shapes in open G, slowly, the way a person plays when they are not performing but exploring, following the instrument's response to find out what it had to say. That was when Marcus Webb walked over. Marcus Webb was 23 years old, had been playing guitar since he was 15, and had spent 3 years building a YouTube channel to 200,000 subscribers through the combination of technical ability and consistent production that the platform rewarded, weekly uploads, high production values, the kind of content that demonstrated speed and precision in ways that generated the specific kind of engagement that speed and precision generated. Marcus was at Sam Ash on this Tuesday afternoon with 3 friends who were also YouTube guitarists, doing what they did on Tuesday afternoons when they were in the city, moving through the store, taking down guitars from the walls, playing at maximum capability, recording each other for the upload schedule, the ambient noise of the store, other guitarists, the hum of amplifiers, the percussion of hands testing drum pads at the back, was the specific ambient noise of a room that contained a lot of people all trying simultaneously to demonstrate something. When Marcus saw the 71-year-old man in the reading glasses sitting quietly on a testing stool playing open chord shapes on a dreadnought acoustic at a volume that barely carried across the surrounding noise, Marcus saw what his content instincts had trained him to see in this kind of contrast. Material. An old man on a guitar that required more than he appeared to have. The kind of thing that generated engagement. Marcus walked over. Marcus said, "No offense, but that's a player's guitar. We've got some nicer beginner stuff at the back if you want something more your level." His friends had their phones up. One of them was already smiling. Keith Richards looked up at Marcus. Keith Richards' expression did not change. Keith Richards showed patience, the specific, unhurried patience of a person who has heard every version of that sentence across 50 years of playing guitar and who has learned, through all those years, that the only response worth making is not made with words. Keith Richards placed the acoustic carefully back on the stand. Keith Richards stood up. Keith Richards stepped aside. Behind the counter, Linda uncrossed and recrossed her arms and settled in. Marcus took the testing stool. Marcus lifted an electric guitar from the nearby wall and plugged into the amplifier and cranked the gain to the level that his content required. Marcus played. Marcus played with the genuine technical ability that 200,000 subscribers represented, sweep arpeggios, tapping sequences, speed that was by any objective measure impressive and that had been built through 8 years of daily practice into a style that the algorithm recognized and rewarded. His friends moved around him, capturing it from different angles. When Marcus finished, he looked at Keith Richards, who was standing near the acoustic guitar section, watching with the quiet attention of someone who has watched a great many guitarists play in a great many rooms, and who knows what he is seeing. Marcus grinned. Marcus said, "Your turn, old man. Old school versus new school. Come on, the comments are going to be incredible." His friends pointed their phones at Keith Richards. One of them was already laughing in anticipation. Keith Richards looked at Marcus. Keith Richards looked at the phones. Keith Richards looked at Linda behind the counter. Linda's expression communicated one thing, precisely. "Go ahead. 30 years on this street, and I have been waiting for exactly this." Keith Richards walked to the acoustic stand. Keith Richards took down the same dreadnought he had been playing before Marcus arrived. Keith Richards sat on the stool. Keith Richards did not plug into the amplifier. Keith Richards reached across and turned the amplifier Marcus had been using down to its lowest setting, which produced not silence but the specific quiet volume that made every note count rather than every note compete. Then Keith Richards closed his eyes. Marcus pointed at his friend's camera. "Watch this. This is going to be content." Keith Richards closed his eyes and played one note. The note was a sustained open G, held with the vibrato that 52 years of playing had made as involuntary and as complete as breathing, a vibrato that did not ornament the note but was the note, that carried within its duration the accumulated weight of a life spent finding out what a guitar string could say when the person holding it had stopped trying to impress anyone and had started trying to tell the truth. The note did not fill the room in the way that Marcus's amplified shredding had filled it. It did something more consequential than that. It made the room quiet. Marcus's grin, which had been directed at his friend's camera, stopped moving. His friend's cameras kept recording, but the commentary stopped because the note had removed the space in which commentary was possible. Something was happening in Sam Ash Music on West 48th Street on a Tuesday afternoon in July that had not been in the content plan. Keith Richards followed the note with the opening of Wild Horses. He played it the way it had existed before it was a recording, the way it had existed in the rented house in Muscle Shoals, Alabama in 1969, when Keith Richards had been sitting on the floor at 2 a.m. with an acoustic guitar, and the song had arrived all at once, the chord sequence and the melody together, and Keith Richards had reached for the cassette recorder on the table beside him and recorded it quietly before going back to sleep, because the song was there and he knew from experience that songs that arrived at 2 a.m. in complete form needed to be recorded before sleep could revise them. He played it now in Sam Ash Music on 48th Street in the same open G tuning it had been written in, slowly, with the breathing, organic phrasing that the song had always required of him. Each note allowed its full duration, each space between notes given the same weight as the notes themselves. The melody moving at the pace of something that understood its own destination and was not in any hurry to arrive. Within 30 seconds, every musician in Sam Ash who had been playing their own instrument had stopped. Within 45 seconds, 4 customers who had been in other sections of the store had moved toward the sound. Within a minute, the ambient noise of 48th Street coming through the door was the only sound competing with what was coming from the testing stool, and it was not winning. A man who had been looking at bass guitars near the back said it loud enough for the whole store to hear. "That is Keith Richards. That is Wild Horses." The words moved through Sam Ash the way recognitions move through rooms that have been made quiet enough to receive them, completely, immediately, reaching every person simultaneously. Marcus's face completed a journey that his friends' cameras recorded in full, the content creator confidence of 5 minutes earlier draining away, replaced by the recognition of what he was hearing, and then the recognition of who was making it, and then the specific information that the man Marcus had directed to the beginner section had written the song Marcus was hearing, and that Marcus had learned to play guitar specifically because of Keith Richards, had watched a Rolling Stones concert video on YouTube at 15 years old and had gone to his father the following morning and said that he wanted to learn guitar, and his father had bought him a second-hand acoustic the following week, and that acoustic was the beginning of 8 years of daily practice, and those 8 years of practice were the reason Marcus had 200,000 subscribers. Marcus had 200,000 subscribers because of Keith Richards. Marcus had just told Keith Richards to try the beginner section. Marcus had just told Keith Richards to try the beginner section. Keith Richards stopped before finishing Wild Horses. Keith Richards opened his eyes. Keith Richards looked at Marcus. Keith Richards held the acoustic guitar out. "Play with me," Keith Richards said. Marcus stared at the guitar. Marcus said, "I called you old. I said the guitar was too much for your level. I'm sorry." His voice had lost the performance quality that his content required and had become the voice of a 23-year-old who was talking to a person rather than to a camera. "You are young," Keith Richards said. "I am old. We are both right. But the guitar does not know the difference. The guitar only knows what you put into it. You play fast, I will play slow. We will see which one the room is still listening to when we finish." Marcus picked up his guitar. Marcus began to play. Something had changed. The speed was still there, but it was now in service of something larger than itself, pulled and shaped by the conversation Keith Richards was holding at the other end, slower, deeper, each note placed with the patience of someone who understood that the space between notes was the music's breathing room, and that music needed to breathe. They played together for 25 minutes in Sam Ash Music on West 48th Street, while Linda stood behind the counter without moving, and the customers who had gathered stood without sitting, and the cameras on Marcus's friends' phones kept recording something none of them had planned to record. When they finished, Marcus set his guitar down and extended his hand. "I am sorry and thank you," Marcus said. "Today I learned the difference between playing for views and playing for the song." Keith Richards shook the hand. Keith Richards spoke quietly enough that the cameras at the edges of the group picked up some of it. "Speed is for the audience," Keith Richards said. "Tone is for the song. Learn to play for the song. The audience will follow if there is something worth following." 3 weeks later, Marcus posted a video. The title was, "The Day I Told Keith Richards He Was Too Old for That Guitar." Marcus's introduction was honest. "This is the most embarrassing thing I have filmed in 3 years of making content. It is also the most important. I told Keith Richards to try the beginner section. He responded by playing Wild Horses, and I will never play the same way again. And I am posting this because you should see it." The video received 3.5 million views. Marcus's channel grew from 200,000 subscribers to 580,000 over the following year. His playing changed, but was now accompanied by dynamics, by notes held past the point that technique required, by silences that had not previously existed in his vocabulary as a musician. On the wall of Sam Ash Music at 163 West 48th Street, near the acoustic guitar section, a framed photograph shows 2 men on testing stools, one older and one younger, both holding guitars in the middle of something neither had planned. The brass plate beneath reads, "The day someone told Keith Richards he was too old for that guitar. West 48th Street, New York, July 2015. He was not." If this story gave you something, the reminder that the song is always more important than the speed, and that the guitar has always known this even when the guitarist did not. Share it today with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from today. Every week, another story from a life that always played for the song.